going to welcome you all now to our third webinar in our Spring CitySprouts Teacher Forum series. And my name is Jane Hershey, and I'm the director of the CitySprouts program. And I'm really thrilled to have you all with us, and looking forward to hearing from our teachers and looking forward to hearing questions from the people who are online here. Our webinars are meant to connect teachers to other teachers, showcasing the really excellent ways that teachers use their school gardens for instruction, but also ways that they use their garden for building class community, for establishing a culture of respect and curiosity among their students. In short, supporting their children's healthy and social emotional development. That is our focus today, I'm very pleased to say. We are going to be hearing from 4 educators at the King Open Elementary School in Cambridge. The focus of their presentations is using the garden for young people's emotional health, which we all know is a key part of learning. So this was recommended to us last fall by other teachers saying, you know, we really use the garden for instruction, but it's so much more than that for us. And so this session has been a while in coming. I think everyone's particularly looking forward to it, to hear from these teachers and to think about some of the ways that the garden, the learning garden, is used not explicitly for lessons, but in ways that are as important to learning as anything else. We, all of us on this call, I'm sure, and certainly at CitySprouts, hope that these stories inspire questions, inspire your comments about integrating the garden with a lesson outside or bringing the garden into the classroom, both of which we consider garden-based learning. And we hope that you consider this session today and all of these webinars as an invitation to start more conversations about garden-based learning. I am, as I said, Jane Hershey. I'm the executive director and founder of the CitySprouts School Garden Program. We have a program in 20 elementary and middle schools in Cambridge and Boston. Our particular model of garden-based learning provides on-site support to teachers in using their learning gardens for instruction and so much more. We also maintain edible learning gardens at our partner schools, including in the summer. And in that summer, we don't just take care of the gardens. We we have a great summer program for middle school youth, which gets kids into the garden in that wonderful time of year when everything is ripe and blooming and ready to harvest. Okay, so I just want to say again how much we're looking forward to questions from people here. We're looking forward to the whole conversation, as well as we are from the presentations from teachers themselves. And I have just a few reminders before Elizabeth Castellano starts to speak. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be posted on our website. And you can find all of these previous webinars at the Teacher Forum page, citysprouts.org. Everyone is muted, and that's just so that we can really hear the presenters. But I promise that I will be your voice. And if you use that chat box down at the bottom, as Shay and I have done, we will be able to get your questions that way, and I will be saying them out loud to teachers at the end of the sessions or perhaps in the middle if it seems like that's the best place for it. So again, our guests today are Elizabeth Castellana, Administrative Manager at the King Open, Christy Pica and Ariel Clemmer, who are teachers at the King Open, and CitySprouts Garden Coordinator, Aaron Taylor. And now, Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi. Take my phone off speaker.
Yes, hi, Elizabeth. We can hear you. That's great.
Great. So I'm here to talk more about how we use the garden, particularly around students who are having behavior issues in the classroom. And these are typically general education students who are mainstreamed in our general ed classrooms. If you could click over to the next slide. Can I do that? Oh, I have control. Great. So this is a student who uses the garden from time to time just as a place to take breaks. Obviously, when a student goes into the garden, it's with supervision. We're really fortunate at our school to have our garden be completely surrounded by our building. So it's a really beautiful space, but it's also quiet. It's separate. You can't really hear street traffic. You can't hear the recess yard. And it's a really, sort of feels like a secret garden in the middle of our school. So this is the kind of place where if I have to remove a student from class or a student is brought to the office and they're having difficulty kind of emerging from whatever behaviors were prompting them to be needed to be removed from the class, I'll often just say, let's go outside, and we'll go right out to the garden. And it's like the second we get that first hit of fresh air, everything changes. I find that particularly for students with trauma histories, the garden is really transformative for them. My thinking around that is that whether they're in the classroom or they're in my office or they're taking a walk through the halls, they're still sort of in this very institutional setting. They have cinder block walls, fluorescent lights, you know, the same rules, the same expectations, the same noises, same smells. And once we get outside, it's like we've left that environment in a way that isn't possible just by leaving a classroom or going to an office. There have been lots of different things that have happened in the garden, sort of just by occurrence, that have been really powerful. I was out in the garden with a fifth grader one time when he found a baby bird in the sandbox who appeared to be injured and unable to fly. And so that student created a little bit of a well in the sandbox for the bird to kind of feel protected and surrounded by a wall of sand. And then we checked on the bird a couple hours later. It was still in there, but it looked more comfortable. And then a few hours later, it was in the tree, and it was staring into the window into my office. And I said it was keeping an eye on that kid and saying thank you. Other things that we do are, you know, help clean up the garden, and it helps to get some physical energy out for that child. Sometimes we go on, like, treasure hunts. We have a giant sycamore tree that drops these really neat seed pods in the fall that they turn kind of fuzzy like a natural pom-pom, and so we'll go on hunts for things like that, or various other things that we might find in the garden, like milkweed pods. And it's also a chance for kids to collect things that can be useful to their class. Like if they're doing a unit on seed pods, we could collect those and they can do something that they feel is contributing back to their class environment, which can be restorative for them if they feel like they've damaged their classroom or their community. Let's see, what else?
Elizabeth, I just want to say a word about that secret garden sense of your garden. People listening in might not know just how urban and dense the neighborhood is and what a respite that lovely garden feels like. I don't know if you could just give us a word or two about what it's like outside the garden or around the streets around the school.
Sure. Well, our school is on Cambridge Street in East Cambridge, which is one of the sort of grittier parts of Cambridge. This is where they filmed the Whitey Bulger movie because they thought that Southie was no longer gritty enough, so they came to East Cambridge instead. So it has that really sort of urban, not very up-to-date feel in the neighborhood. And Cambridge Street is a very busy street. It's one of the main roads that leads right into Boston, into the entrance to 93. And yeah, it's a very dense neighborhood. It's a very Afro-Caribbean neighborhood. And it's a neighborhood that's very alive and awake all the time. And in our garden, it really does somehow feel like you can be transported elsewhere. It's very serene. It gets a lot of beautiful direct sunlight. It's filtered by beautiful flowering trees. And, you know, we do have these, like, baby birds and lots of little creatures who like to be there, I think, for the same reasons that the kids like to be there. So it really just feels like a respite in the city once you're in there, and it's also beautifully taken care of. So it's thank you for just highlighting a little bit more what that difference, that contrast must feel like to your students. Yeah, The other thing that I would add is, you know, I think that we focus a lot on leveraging the academic value in the garden, but I personally, and this could just be that I'm speaking as somebody who is a former Outward Bound instructor and, you know, has always kind of had a love of outdoor learning. But I feel really that it's important that we not only look at the value of the garden based on academics. I think that it is a place that can be so powerful because that's not what happens there, and it can be powerful because it's a quiet place to have a conversation with a friend. It's a place to just not feel like you're at school, and I think giving kids a chance to not be burdened by the expectations of behavior and academic achievement is really important, and just give them a place where they can feel like they've left that behind them for a little bit can help leverage them to get back into the school and feel more ready to be able to engage on those levels.
Mm.
I think that's all for me.
Great. Thank you so much. That's
No
really
problem.
great to hear, and I'm taking notes to ask you later. I don't want to slow down Christy here, but for others of you who've got questions for Elizabeth, please write them down there, and she'll stay on the line and be able to answer some of our questions later. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you. Okay, so I teach kindergarten, first grade in the ASD program. So my students are on the autism spectrum. And we have mainly used the garden to give my kids an opportunity to get outside again, aside from recess, and to have time to move and to explore. And one thing about students with autism and other students who have behavioral challenges is sometimes they have difficulties regulating their bodies, their nervous system, and the garden has a lot of natural opportunities for students to get sensory input that they need. Just really quickly, some of those areas that they might need sensory input, which just means some moving part of their body, using part of their body to experience the garden. Smells and tastes can be alerting, soothing, or refreshing. Things that move their joints and muscles, we call it proprioceptive input or hard work. Things like digging, running, pushing, pulling, reaching, jumping. Giving that input to their muscles and joints can help calm them and help their nervous system to be more organized, which means less chaotic. Vestibular movement means moving through space. It can also be calming or alerting. Jumping, running, swinging, things that kind of make you, you know, the feeling you get on a roller coaster, you know, moving through space can sometimes be really wonderful and helpful for them. Tactile input, things like sand, leaves, berries, the plants, and so that's, you know, the garden is an amazing opportunity for the students to go out there and explore and kind of find what they need in that regard. In the fall, when the weather was nice, we would take oh, thank you. I need to, let's look at the garden instead of the photograph of me. So yes, we're using it to be outdoors, to have free time to move and explore. And, you know, sometimes on Friday afternoon, everybody is just done. We can't do any more. Teachers and students need a way to decompress. And we'll go out there for 10 to 15 minutes, and they just run around. They find things that are of interest to them. And also sometimes a student will want to earn a trip to the garden as an incentive for work. So that student might complete a few work items, get all the tokens on their token board, and then visit the garden for 3 to 5 minutes with the teacher. And that can be a powerful reinforcer, right? Last October, I had a student who was new to my classroom and who had never had a school experience at all. The garden was a very therapeutic place for him to be, and he wanted to work to visit the garden. That was his work incentive. I have the staffing to make that possible, but that can be a powerful incentive.
That's interesting that 3 to 5 minutes can be can work. But
right.
Such a little bit of time can make a difference.
That's a good point. You know, this was a JK student, and for them, 3 to 5 minutes feels longer than it does to an adult, and yet you're right, it can be, that little amount of time can be enough for them to be ready to go back. Now, I was actually hesitant at first to go to the garden without an appointment, and I just, being a new teacher, I've never had the energy to really process like all the opportunities that were in the emails and everything, and I felt badly about that. But we've always felt welcome. As soon as we started going, we realized that we were welcome there without an appointment. We were welcome to explore. You know, we try to be considerate of what others are doing in the garden, but there has always been a place for us. There was one time where I felt like my students needed to stay in the sandbox rather than go through the garden, but they love the sandbox. So there's always been a place for us out there. And Erin has been so welcoming. We come out there and spontaneously she gets us involved in something, and we love it. I mentioned the sandbox. That's been kind of a point of interest to my students. There's some opportunities there to dig, to get some input for the muscles and joints, tactile input for the hands. Can be a soothing place to be, a fun place for a little group to gather. So last fall, the leaves were amazing. There was such a deep layer of leaves in the garden when I took my students out there. It was just really exciting, and we could shuffle our feet through them. It was like a sea. And Erin was out there, and she had my students help her put some leaves in the wheelbarrow. And one of my students found the experience so wonderfully. The sensory input was just so wonderful that he actually crawled in through the wheelbarrow, trying to get them on his stomach. And the next thing, his whole body was in the wheelbarrow, and it was just a really joyous experience for him. Another thing that happened in the fall, we were lucky to get out there at the right time. The milkweed pods, is that what you call them? They were just at the right point that if you opened them, all of the seeds just flew out like butterflies. I mean, they just went everywhere. It was just beautiful. They just soared in the breeze, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And we were in the middle of our butterfly unit, and it just happens that butterflies eat the leaves of these plants. They don't eat the seeds, but it was still a close connection to the butterfly unit. I thought that was really neat. I'd like to let the other kindergarten teachers know to try and show their kids the pods. It was just really pretty. And they were all able to open them and see them fly out. It was really neat. So in preparation for the cider pressing activity that Erin organized, any kids who were in the garden could help sort the rotten apples from the good ones. So we didn't need an appointment for that. You know, there were lots of apples out there, and my students enjoyed throwing the rotten ones into the wheelbarrow. And that, again, is a good sensory activity. You've got the muscles and joints working. You can hear it hit. You know, you're running around. You get that vestibular input. It was just, you know, it's an activity that was accessible for any kid. Let's see. So one organized activity that we finally took advantage of was the cider pressing. And it was just wonderful. There were just so many senses that were just invigorated by that activity. My students got to slice apples, put apples in the machine, they turned the crank, they held the bucket. You know, all of those things are working their muscles and joints, and they're touching things with their fingers. They're smelling the apples and smelling the fall air. And then they got to taste the apple cider. That was truly amazing. It was so good. I had a student who wanted more. Not all kids, sometimes kids with autism are very picky, but I had a couple who just loved it, and the teachers loved it. So we just really appreciated that. It was wonderful. So we have loved the garden so much this year and appreciate the emotional benefits that we get by visiting it.
Thank you so much, Christy. That's really a great description of tying the kinetic and the vestibular movement with emotional states, and that just outright joyous feeling that you describe of that student who just had his, you know, belly in the wheelbarrow and filled with leaves. I think a lot of us were just saying, oh yes, I know what that's like. So it's really interesting hearing you and Elizabeth talk about how important this is for students. I think most of us are involved in this field because it was really important to us. And these are students who have different kinds of challenges, and to hear how you work that in as a teacher with them is really, really interesting. And we have one more teacher to speak here, Ariel Clemmer, who.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll pass the phone to her.
Yeah, over to you, Ariel.
Hi, this is Ariel. Hi.
Hi,
okay,
Ariel.
So, hi, Jane. I am an autism teacher at King Open, like Christy. I teach grades second and third. I teach second and third grade this year. I taught first through third since I've been at King Open. I've had my classroom for 7 years now, and Christy and I both teach substantially separate classrooms for kids on the autism spectrum. So we have usually 5 students in our classrooms and other staff besides us to help us out. We have a wide range of needs in our classrooms. But I love using the garden. I've been using the garden with my class since I started teaching at King Open. And we do use the garden, as Christy and Elizabeth have talked about, just as a place for the kids to go and be and relax and walk around and enjoy being outside and feel like they can take a break from the classroom. But I've also used the garden in more structured ways with my students, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. So we'll go to the first slide. So this year, every week, I've been able to email with our garden coordinator, Erin, and she's given me a lot of ideas of things that we can do when we go into the garden. So the next few slides are just kind of lists of lots of things that we were able to harvest this fall, and just kind of gave me some ideas of a way to structure our time in the garden when we went. Here are some more ideas of things to do in the garden besides harvesting, digging in the compost, planting seeds, sorting apples. And these were all things that we took advantage of this year and I have done in past years as well. And sometimes we'll go into the garden and do more than one activity or have stations, depending on the kids that I have each year and the amount of staff that I can have out in the garden with me. So this year I tried to set up 1 to 2 visits each week from 20 to 30 minutes. And I do sometimes try to, well, I always try to connect what we're doing in the garden to other things that we're studying. So students in my classroom have a lot of things that I need to consider, such as behavior. And sometimes I have a student, such as this year, that if we just went into the garden, a student could run around, throw rocks, throw dirt, kind of get a little bit overstimulated. So I tried as much as I could to prepare the students before we went out into the garden, talked about expectations, rules. That works really well for a lot of the students in the autism classrooms, I find. And once we go into the garden, they know what's expected. Some of my students they don't like to smell certain things, they don't like to touch certain things because of their sensory sensitivities that Christy talked about. So those are just all things that I try to be aware of when we spend time in the garden. Some favorite activities that we have done are the apple pressing that Christy talked about. That's always really wonderful. Something really fun this year we did was dig up potatoes that we planted last year, and we brought them back into the classroom and we cooked them up. I had an electric skillet that I brought in, and we made little potatoes, and the kids got a chance to taste them as well, and that was delicious and it was really fun. I like to take photos of the things that we do in the garden, the different seasons, tie that into a unit on living and non-living things. And things like scavenger hunts are fun as a way to get to know the garden, and you could do a different one for each season as well. My students love watering the flowers using the hose or the watering cans. A picture of one of my students watering the plants.
with help.
Mm-hmm.
So I say here that a lot of my students need close supervision because we are a substantially separate classroom, and we're able to provide them that when we go into the garden. And they really love it. It's, of course, a break from the day. It is such a wonderful space in the center of our school. It's usually very peaceful, and we're often the only people there when we go, which is really nice and relaxing. And although it's not, I think it's fun to get our hands dirty, and I think it's just different, and it kind of, a lot of the kids aren't used to getting their hands dirty. They're not used to gardening in their home outside of school. So it's kind of, it pushes them to have different experiences that they might not have outside of school. And it also breaks up the morning nicely, or the afternoon, or it could be a nice end of the day activity, but I'd like it to be a structured activity.
Okay.
So I just list some recommendations. The different offerings that the garden has for all students. And I just talk about how I hope that the experiences in the garden are really memorable and enriching in ways that worksheets and books are not, or at least a break from that kind of work, which they get all the time, every day. And of course, there's all the different sensory experiences that they get in the garden that they don't get in the classroom.
Thank you so much, Ariel. And before we go on to Erin, there are a couple of quicker questions that I just think you should stop and answer now before we hear Erin.
Okay.
And those both have to do with food. Carrie asked a question about what kinds of foods kids taste, and are they all raw? And then you talked about cooking the potatoes, but I wondered if there were some other foods that you cooked or prepared in different ways, or what that's like for the kids to just be able to pick and taste versus to go back and make some food.
This is Erin. I think some of the other things we've tasted with Ariel's class outside were Mizuna tomato, which we clipped with scissors, which was really also fun to be able to practice that skill, and cherry tomatoes, basil, I think. And yeah, do we do carrots? I can't even.
Carrots, lots of different types of greens. We've collected, we always taste them, and sometimes we send them home with the students, or we share them with the cafeteria staff.
Lots of different kinds of grains, did you say?
Greens.
Greens, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, Ariel, there was one more question about husk cherries and what your students thought of husk cherries, which was on the list of things that were growing in the garden.
I'm sorry, so can you say that again? Of what?
Husk cherries.
Oh, I think that we looked at them and Erin talked about them with the students. I don't remember if we.
Yeah, I think that list that was on Ariel's slide was an example taken from one of our emails that we back and forth during the fall. So those were the possibilities for that week, and then I don't know that that was actually ever what we chose to do.
So that's yet to come, what your students actually think of husk cherries. Okay.
But growing up in preschoolers love husk cherries, so.
Well, that's good to know. Okay, well, we'll pass it over to you, Erin, and I've got other questions down here that I'm just going to save until after Erin speaks. So, but I don't want to take up any more of your time, Erin, so why don't you go ahead?
Is the sound okay if I leave it like this?
Yes, it is good. We can hear you.
Oh, great. So I have been the garden coordinator at King Open only since July. So as you heard, there's a long history of people using this garden for a lot of different purposes before I came. But just some most of this context you've already heard at this point. There are a lot of teachers at King Open, this is a picture of the King Open garden, who use the garden to support their academic goals and standards, and then also all of these other things that you've already kind of heard examples of throughout the other presentations. So the main thing I'm going to talk about, I guess, is how we've started to try to put some systems in place to make it easier to do a lot of the things that you just heard everyone else talk about, and easier for people to use the garden without me, because I'm only here one morning and one afternoon per week, and the types of uses that we've been talking about, especially when a kid needs to make an apology of action or just take a break, are not really things that you can schedule ahead of time. So one of the things we started talking about this fall was how we can kind of set things up in a way that makes it really easy for several different adults in the building to be able to do something with a kid in the garden whenever it's needed. So some of that is just ongoing communication, both through emails and just in passing in the hallways. We're trying out some just weekly emails with like what is available, so particularly like for a particular class or maybe in general. And then what you're seeing pictures of right now are a system that we are starting to get to establish with the compost, where I left out different size buckets and some instructions on our compost, which is a really nice big compost at King Open, so that anyone who has had this pretty brief conversation with me and wants to take a kid outside to dig in the compost can use those different size buckets to kind of limit the task and say, okay, we're going to stay out here for as long as it takes to fill the blue bucket or the orange bucket or whatever, depending on the length of time you want to use on the size of the kid. And having signage out there that shows where we're moving the compost at any given time so that anyone can do that at any time. You don't need to check in with me, and you can have that physical break.
Can I just ask you a quick question, Erin? Could you tell us what an apology of action is and maybe give us an example?
Yeah, so Elizabeth kind of touched on this without necessarily using that vocabulary, but the idea that if there's a student who has done something that was harmful to their classroom community or to a specific other person, that you can apologize with your words, but it can be more meaningful if you also do an action to kind of repair that relationship. And so if it's with one individual person, there's often kind of a logical apology of action, like if you broke something that belongs to someone, like help them fix it. But if it's more just, harming the community in general, then you can come out to the garden and do something that helps contribute back to the community in general, such as sorting apples, which is another thing that we kind of tried to set up in a way that anyone could come use it at any time, regardless of whether I was there. We kept like certain buckets and certain wheelbarrows constant as being the good and the bad apples. Or if, I think Elizabeth used this as an example too, maybe you're making an apology of action to your classroom by bringing something that the class needs from the garden, like seed pods or milkweed seeds, or making a bouquet to bring some beauty back into your class to kind of say, I'm sorry.
That is so interesting. In the same conversation in the same school, and I presume even with some of the same kids, the garden experience is used both as an incentive for good behavior, but also, a means of restitution, for doing something wrong. And that is really interesting, and I can only presume that it's effective for both kinds of situations, if it's something that teachers continue to do. I would be curious to hear from any teachers there, Elizabeth or Ariel or Christy or Erin, something about that, two ways of using the garden with their students, both as restitution and as an incentive.
This is Elizabeth. I am a little bit surprised sometimes at how eager the kids are to go to the garden, and they, if they have ended up in the garden with me because of something negative that happened, as a way to kind of bring them out of that tantrum or that funk, whatever it may be,
they often the next day will come in and say, can we spend some time in the garden? And obviously that's something I want to encourage. And I think, you know, we are in a very dense neighborhood in Cambridge, and I don't think a lot of our students have yards or gardens that they can play in. They have parks, but it does have that exposed urban feeling that the garden doesn't have. And the garden has that protected, secretive quality that parks don't have.
And you're not supposed to be digging things up in parks anyway, are you?
Yeah, you're not really meant to get your hands too dirty in a park. So it is really nice to see that I think the kids, you know, I mean, I remember even up through college myself when a professor would say, we're going to just have this discussion outside. It was such a nice treat just to be out of the same routine and out of the same environment. And I think for our kids too, it's just nice not to be under the fluorescent lights and surrounded by cement walls every now and then. But also they're going to get some one-on-one attention, and they're going to have a little bit more room to move. So I think all those liberties that they have access to do function, you know, in that sort of dialectic of both being a restorative response to a negative feeling or a negative experience, but also being something that they look forward to and ask for, you know, as something proactive and positive that they can do just as a change of pace.
Thank you. We had a question, I think it was for Christy, but it could, I think, also be answered by any of the teachers there, about a contrast of working with students who maybe were on the autism spectrum or had other different learning styles or challenges, and not having a garden, where they're, what's the difference between having that resource and not having that resource for you?
So I can answer this briefly, but I'd love to get anyone else's input. So this is my second year teaching as a lead teacher, and I'll really just compare last year with this year, because last year being a bit overwhelmed and having some outside pressures as far as to what we were spending our hours and minutes doing in my classroom. I don't remember visiting the garden last year, maybe once. And I just think as far as like the classroom climate affecting teachers and students, just feeling like we have the freedom to do something like that, it just makes everybody feel better. It just, you know, it just makes you feel like, wow, it's okay that I'm tired right now, and there's something productive we can do even when we're feeling tired. And we're feeling like we need a change of setting, and it just makes, I just feel like my classroom feels more flexible this year, and that's been part of that.
Yeah, and this is Ariel speaking?
That was Christy.
Okay, Christy speaking. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there others who want to answer that question?
I can say something. This is Ariel. You know, we don't go into the garden ever during the winter months. So it actually, at this point now, we haven't been in the garden for a few months. So I think, you know, you get used to just being cooped up inside, and we always try to find activities or things that the kids want to earn. We have a lot of behavior contracts with a lot of our students in the ASD classrooms. So we're always trying to think of ways to think outside the box, and maybe it's a little bit of extra recess time instead, or doing some other activity around the school, but it just gives us that extra space that's so unique when we are able to go into the garden. And, you know, we really only do that in the fall and in the spring. Well, we're here in the summer too, so we get the summer as well. But there's a difference, but yeah, we're very lucky, I think, to have access to the garden during the times that we can.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your answer is, in fact, even with the same kids, you have that experience of not having the resource in the wintertime. So,
right.
So you feel probably in a very real way what it's like to have it and not have it. We have a question from Shay here about, are there ever do you have students who are reluctant to being in the garden as a form of restorative justice? They're ones who don't want to use it to right a wrong.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when a kid is having a hard time, their first response to anything you suggest is no. So yeah, there are definitely kids who are resistant to it. But often I think they say yes because it's an unexpected offer. I think they're used to being offered the same choices when they're in trouble or when they're struggling. You know, you can write a letter, you can have a little break, we can talk later, you can write me a letter about it. But do you want to go outside with me is something I think that a lot of kids sort of feel like, huh, all right, maybe I'll give that a try. And I don't usually frame it as we're going to go outside in order to fix it. I just frame it as going outside. So I think if I said, let's go to the garden so that we can make a bouquet that you can give to the person who you insulted as an apology, I think they'd say, no, I'm not going to do that. But if I just say, let's go outside, after a few minutes out in the fresh air and the sunshine, you know, then we might start to talk and process what happened, and then as an outshot of that, we might say, you know, maybe we could bring them a flower, or, you know, it could be more generic, where we just say, let's do some cleaning in the garden, and that way we won't feel so bad about our impact on the school today, and we'll feel like we did something good, even though we also feel like we did something bad. So generally, it's more like we're offering a break from the routine of processing problems in an office, and then once we're out there, we're able to access different options because we've gotten into a different emotional state by being out there.
That's interesting. Are there other teachers who have a like or different experience from Elizabeth?
They're just shrugging. I think I'm the only one here who, like, I think with a student in an autism classroom, it might not be a safe option if a student is upset or tantruming.
Excuse me, who is speaking?
This is Elizabeth still.
Okay, Elizabeth. Okay, sorry. Elizabeth.
Yeah, and then a regular classroom teacher wouldn't be able to leave their class with a student who's having a hard time. So I think I'm one of the only people, besides like our school adjustment counselor, who takes kids out there as a response to negative behaviors.
Well, that's interesting. You're groundbreaking there. So we're getting to hear it right here. I am really curious how that goes. So that sounds like a really interesting and innovative idea, and I hope that that more people get to hear about it.
Yeah, well, come visit us anytime.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to point out just some of the things that you teachers said. And I just want to say again, what I started off the session is saying that this is something we've really been waiting to have, this kind of a session where we're talking about learning, but we're talking about it as, first of all, just giving kids the space to relax and a place to explore and a place that gives kids autonomy. Elizabeth told a story about, if I've got your stories mixed up, please correct me, but I think it was Elizabeth telling a story about a student who found a baby bird and in the sandbox made little protective walls for it. That was you, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Yeah, and just that opportunity for kids to have that kind of an agency is something that the garden can bring. Christy talked about connecting the garden with the really important kinetic movement that her students need and the vestibular movement, and just having that extra space and that relaxing, interesting place for kids to be moving, and how important that was. Ariel, you said something that was also reflected in what other people said about that outside experience for your students is something that they don't often get at home. And there's such a contrast between kids who spend their weekends outside or go camping or go interesting places outside of their very urban neighborhood and the ones that don't. I feel every kid needs that outdoor experience, but not every kid gets it. And you are working with a lot of students who don't get that at home, and how much more important that is for them there. So thank you so much for giving us these very real examples of of how you use your garden in a really big, deeper context for learning. I have one more question, and I just would like to put it out there for you all before we go, unless we have another viewer who poses a question down in the chat box. But my question is really thinking about ownership, your ownership as teachers of the garden. And it really strikes me that even given that one of you talked about being a little hesitant at first to go out there unscheduled or without Erin, that you all now use that garden as a place that belongs to you. And your sense of ownership of it is reflected, I think, a little bit in your students' sense of ownership. So I'm just wondering what that means to you, and how do you get that? How does a teacher get that sense of owning the garden as a place that they really feel they can use and form, you know, I won't say the word manipulate, but use in different ways for their students? Can I just throw that to all three of you and see who answers?
Yeah, I think you just gotta go out there. I think in our garden here, some teachers just go out into the garden to have lunch or to just take a break themselves, or even sometimes have a meeting if it's a nice day and there's a picnic table out there. That's kind of a way to start. And then when you see all the things that are going on in the garden, take a walk around, you kind of get ideas of how to encourage your kids, you know, what to do when you bring them out. You know, our garden coordinator, Erin, is she invites us into the garden all the time. She sends us emails all the time. She's here in the school, and teachers just need to, I think, just go into the garden and see. It's just always going to be a memorable experience, and the more you go, the more ideas you get, and it becomes something that the kids can really look forward to, or whatever. You see what happens out there, but it's just so different than the things that are happening inside. So I think I would just encourage teachers to try it out and see how it goes.
I would also, this is Elizabeth, I would also just add, I think that there has been a shift in our building. Our building is being demolished after this year, and the garden that we will have in our temporary building is really just a few raised beds on a concrete play yard. And so I think that there's really been a recognition that this is something we should enjoy as much as we can while we have it. We will have a new building with a new garden, but there's nothing quite the same as established old growth trees, you know, with generations of birds who've made their homes in them. And so I think there's been a real kind of imperative among the staff to take advantage of this while we have it.
That's bittersweet.
So yeah, I'm sorry to end on a low note.
Well, yes. Ariel, did you want to add something, or Christy?
Ariel spoke first, but
okay.
I agree with Ariel. I think just try, just go, and then that's all it takes. Just get started.
Yeah, it's almost as if you are like the children themselves, that you just need to go and see what happens, and that teachers need to explore in the garden as well as their students to really figure out what they want to do next.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for that. That was really a wonderful session, and it will be in our archives. So anyone listening here today, if you want to share that with others or check back on it yourself, both the PowerPoints will be in two places on our new website, and the webinars will be archived under the Teacher Resources page. All teachers who, everybody, not just teachers, who've been part of the webinar today will get a certificate of professional development credit by email from Mike, and that will be coming very soon. Additionally, if you're a Cambridge Public School teacher, including our presenters today, or Boston Public School teacher who's listening in, you can get credit for this through your district. So if you're not already set up for that, let us know, and we can help you get connected to that. And I want to invite you lastly to our next session. Next Thursday, also from 4 to 5, we'll be talking with some teachers from Boston, from the David Ellis Elementary School in Boston, about using the garden with their 4th graders to tell stories. So thank you so much, Elizabeth and Christy and Ariel and Aaron, and forgive me for getting your voices mixed up, but I would say altogether you gave us quite a wonderful set of examples and stories about just what a marvelous place your school garden is and how much you've made it part of your students' lives. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you, hear you, next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. I'm going to listen to that one.